All right, to be mindful of everyone's time, I think we should get started here. Thanks for arriving on time, everyone. And first and foremost, thanks for joining today. My name is Ryan Tolson. I lead the commercial partnerships team within SG and Offshore Wind. Each month, we host a monthly webinar. This webinar is supposed to be on a timely and relevant offshore wind topic, and they're purposefully kept short. We do our very best efforts to keep them to 19 minutes. We do this for many purposes, but first and foremost, we don't want to take up too much of your time. These are action or information-packed sessions here. So we try to be as efficient as possible, but we're always open for more detailed and in-depth discussions. So don't hesitate to reach out afterwards. We love to have these more detailed discussions. Also, there will be Q&A. So feel free to type a question in the Q&A field that will come directly to myself. We'll get to those questions at the end if there are any. But for those of you that do not know who SGN is, we are a market intelligence and data analysis company for the ocean industries. We operate in three primary segments. That's shipping, rigs, and offshore wind. Obviously, for today's purposes, we're talking about offshore wind. Oliver and myself are on the offshore wind team. Within our offshore wind team at SGN, we have two primary business segments. The first being our wind analytics platform. This is a market intelligence and data analysis platform for the global offshore wind industry. It's providing transparency and clarity into the entire market. Within this platform, you can see what's planned for the future. By developer, by country, we have a complete list of all offshore wind projects globally with key information that includes tier one equipment contracts, vessel contracts, factories, manufacturers. We have a full floating technology section and much, much more. Our primary clients here are developers, companies within the supply chain, government agencies, consultancies, and financial institutions, primarily helping them with business development and competitive analysis and a broad understanding of the overall market. But that with this data, that leads us into our second business segment, which we call GreenPact Wind. This is a niche consulting service that we offer here at SGN with a heavy focus on sustainability. Norway was the first country to require a carbon footprint report within their tender. We worked very closely with the Norwegian government with the language that went into the tender, and we are working with a number of developers on their carbon footprint. Other countries are following, such as the Netherlands. They have a lot of circularity requirements in their upcoming bid, and we are working with a few of the developers in those rounds. Denmark, the UK, France, to name a few, also have sustainability requirements in their upcoming tenders. We can assist developers with that. But in addition to the carbon footprint report or these reports within the bids, we offer scenario analysis. What I mean by that, what if we source from China versus Europe? What if we're shipping equipment in the winter versus the summertime? How does that impact the footprint within an offshore wind farm? So not only are we working with the developers on these reports, but we're helping them lower the emissions of their project. But that takes us into the bulk of our discussion today, which I'm very excited about. We've got Oliver Stephenson on the line with us. He's the VP of our offshore wind team. And he's going to take you through our wind analytics platform and show you the kind of analysis that can be done, highlighting the recent not so positive news from the UK and the US, and really what that means for the future, the near future of offshore wind. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Oliver. You can take it away and take it from here, Oliver.
Perfect. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, so let's get started looking at what we're saying around leasing rounds, using the wind analytics platform, really just to highlight some of the themes that we're seeing in the market at the moment. And the starting point for this sort of discussion was some conversations we were having with our clients and internally around a lot of the negativity that we hear following recent events in the UK particularly, and then also in the US with the projects there. Really trying to understand, is the tone in the market Yes, the tone in the market is negative at the moment, but does that really represent the reality of what we're seeing in terms of lease rounds most recently? Looking at the last 3 months or so as we come to the end of this year, looking at the final quarter of 2023, and then taking a quick look into 2024 as well. So really, that negativity, is that feeding through into what we see in reality for lease rounds? That sort of preempts some of the results that we will be sharing with our clients in our upcoming quarterly report. So if you are a subscriber to our services, expect that to come out in the next 10 days or so. As we get into the start of Q4, we will publish our Q3 roundup, and some of these findings will obviously be in there, as well as a broader look of what's been going on in offshore wind in the last 3 months. So intention today is to look at this regionally, and I'll use the platform as a way to highlight some of these themes that we're looking at. It will be a whistle stop tour even as we go through some of these countries. So if you do want to have further discussions, as Ryan mentioned, happy to pick any of this up on personal one-on-one calls as well, if you want more detail on any of these areas that we run through today. So what are we looking at here? This is our targets and leasing tool. I will very first, for those of you not familiar with it, draw your attention to the legend to help you understand what you're looking at. Here we're looking at a timeline for the targets and leasing rounds. We'll start with Europe and then we'll work our way through different regions. The purple is an award date. The purple diamond is an award date of a lease that we know is happening. Where you see this two-tone color, that's where there is a degree of uncertainty around, usually around the dates, but it will also be an award date. And then the big blocks usually of blue, and then with the hatch color, the lines, that's always something to look out for where we have an estimated date that we're not sure of. And then we can go through some of these other colors as we work through it, but it's really done on a traffic light basis, no more complicated than that. So having run through that, just so you're aware, there are some estimates in here, particularly around the dates where there's a degree of uncertainty. And I'll draw our attention to that as we run through some of the countries. So started with in Europe, started by framing it in the context of the UK. So maybe let's start with the UK as a sensible place to begin, and let's look at what we have going on. And a lot of the news flow in the UK was around CFD round 5 and the lack of bidders, which meant there was absolutely no CFDs awarded to offshore wind. So you can see absolutely no activity there at all for round 5. That, just to give you the context here, contrasts quite dramatically with round 4, where you can see we had these 6 projects that were awarded subsidies in that CFD round. I would also sort of stress in here varying degrees of success from that CFD round. Obviously, some of the bad news surrounding Vattenfall and the Norfolk Boreas project, which is now not currently moving ahead, although it's not suspended. We've removed all of the dates at the moment from our project list on that one. So some of these moving on, some of them not, but you can see regardless, round 4 was clearly some degree of success in there, whereas round 5 in contrast, clearly not a success, whichever way you look at it. Where does that leave us then if we're trying to look at this in a future process, looking at this in the future? I think all eyes now turn to UK round 5. You can see we've got some degree of uncertainty around the exact dates of that auction process, that lease process, but we're still looking for it to start late this year. At the moment, that is our working assumption. That may change. And then obviously we will update that as we go around. What is clear is that it's reasonably large, with 4 gigawatts on offer in UK round 5 for the Celtic Sea. If we start to look at the projects that we're tracking that are showing interest in this, and I'll just scroll down quickly, not stop at any of this, but you can see the point I'm trying to make is it's a long list with a lot of blue chip developers, as well as a mix of smaller companies that are showing a degree of interest in these projects. So a lot of interest from developers at the moment. Second thing to highlight here will be the color coding that we have, that all of these are blue at the moment. We don't have confirmation that these companies will bid. We just have an expectation that these projects are in that area and they have shown an interest in that bid round. They may choose not to bid, but at the moment, the working assumption is that they're likely to put bids in. And as we get closer and move through that bid round process, this is a set of data that we're updating constantly. So I would look for this to change on a very regular basis as we get more sense and more clarity as we get closer to the bid deadlines on these projects. Key point here is, yes, CFD round 4 was somewhat negative. At the moment, round 5, very negative. But when we're actually looking at the lease rounds, we still see a lot of strength, particularly in that Celtic Sea round that we've got coming up. So I'd expect those regular updates as we go through the next few months.
Yeah, and Oliver, if you don't mind me chipping in here, what does this mean for the future CFD rounds in the UK?
Yeah, okay. So you can see I was talking about round 5 here, which has passed with no bids. We have estimated annual bid rounds coming through. To the best of our knowledge at the moment, that's what the Crown Estate is still looking at doing. So you can see every year we've got a 6-month period in there where we're expecting these CFD rounds to come through. On that, timing's not clear, but should still be an annual process. What I would also sort of highlight on that is there's a potential here that we get a backlog of projects that are queuing up for these CFD rounds and queuing up for the subsidy system. And one thing that we're starting to think about and look at as you get that backlog of projects in here, is that really compressing the projects up even more, and with the potential to really stretch the supply chain that we already know is quite stretched, to say the least, at the moment. So it sort of looks like it's building up to be a potential bigger problem if we're shoehorning all these projects into less CFD rounds. So that's our quick look at the UK. Let me just shut the UK and then just finish up on what we're seeing in the very short term in Europe. I guess in Q3, the big story was Germany, where we saw a lot of volumes. High volumes were awarded in the last quarter in Q3. We did, interestingly, also see a lease round coming through in Lithuania. That was the subsidy-free round that we had in Lithuania. Let me just open the data set there. You can see from the traffic lights, we only had 2 bidders on this, so arguably not a particularly successful bid round, not very competitive. But the winner was Ignitis, a local Lithuanian utility, partnering with Ocean Winds. And that was the subsidy-free round, and it was for 700 megawatts. So reasonably sized project. But good news that we're seeing a new country coming through, that leasing round successfully taking place and being awarded. So positive story there, even though you could argue negative, somewhat negative with just 2 bidders. So not a huge amount of activity outside Germany and Europe, other than what was happening in Lithuania. What you can see also in Lithuania is another process that we have coming later this year that we think might just squeeze into 2023, maybe looking at it slipping into 2024. Terms are somewhat different. It will be subsidized with a direct subsidy, again for 700 megawatts. And you can see at the moment we only have 2 consortia that we're aware of that are likely to bid. And you can see the grey colour here is companies that were considering bidding, consortia that were considering it, but have actually pulled back from that process and have confirmed that they will no longer bid. Our expectation is that as we get closer to this, we will see more interest, more activity there in Lithuania. And quickly looking at Estonia, again, as we go towards the end of this year and into next year, we can see we've got some reasonable interest here, quite strong interest levels from developers in the projects we've got coming through in Estonia in the near future. A mix of both local utilities, local domestic companies, and more sort of North European focused developers as well. Some of the more well-known companies looking at putting in bids there. And this is a confirmed list of qualified bidders that we can see. That's what the orange colour means here, that they have actually submitted into that process. So Estonia looks like it's going to be a slightly more competitive process than we have had elsewhere in Lithuania, in the Baltics. Other ongoing processes that we're looking at, and I won't go into as much detail here, you can explore this if you're a client yourself. Norway, obviously, we're very well aware of the Sørlige Nordsjø 2 and the Utsira Nord floating and fixed projects there, which we're looking for the pre-qualification to finish in the next few weeks. And also we're seeing some positive signals still coming through from Portugal, whether again that sneaks into starting this year or not. But it still looks pretty positive for the first quarter or so of 2024 there. So certainly not a particularly negative picture in the rest of Europe, despite what we have been seeing coming through from that UK CFD round. So I would sort of argue not too negative there. Let's jump in to see what we've got in the Americas. Focus here was in the US, again on a pretty poorly received lease round in the Gulf of Mexico, with just one of those three areas going with just two bidders overall. So pretty poorly received Gulf of Mexico process, which you can sort of jump in and explore that one in here. You can see we had lots of people pre-qualified, lots and lots of companies. Look for that darker green color here. RWE was the only winner in that process, despite some big companies pre-qualifying. Where are we looking forward in the US? If we look at the three rounds we've got coming up, you can see we start with Gulf of Maine, which I guess is going to be the biggest of those lease rounds that we've got in the future. Some nominations, if we expand that, we can see who we know is interested because they've provided nomination information back to BOEM. Again, some big names, but no guarantee they will bid, let alone qualify for those bids. So some degree of interest there in Maine. We expect that to be quite slow, though. There's a lot of work to do to finally define those bid areas into smaller, more manageable zones. If we look at then Oregon, again, you can see we've been out for consultation and there's been some nominations coming back in. What I would say about Oregon is we're slightly more negative there. We've had a fair amount of negative feedback in the consultation processes that we've seen in Oregon. So reasonable volumes that we're looking for with 3 gigawatts there if that all goes successfully, but somewhat more negative there. And then the first of the upcoming lease rounds, probably happening next year, we see the Central Atlantic bid round off the coast of Virginia and Maryland that we can see, and we're expecting potentially 8 gigawatts there, which that might be somewhat on the large side and may find its way being reduced a bit in volume. But nonetheless, all of these lease areas, all of these rounds progressing, and I wouldn't necessarily use the US Gulf of Mexico as a proxy for what we would expect to see on the East Coast. It was somewhat different in what was on offer and how it was received in terms of the way it was structured.
Yeah, Oliver.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. No, fire away.
I was just going to chip in there again and just curious if we're seeing any early movers elsewhere outside of North America besides the United States.
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting point. So you can see I was focusing on the US. In the short term, these are the areas that the rounds we're looking at. But what I've filtered here is for the Americas overall, so North America and South. And you can see some other more interesting interesting countries showing themselves here. Colombia and Uruguay, we've got quite a lot of interest in those countries, but no confirmed dates for those rounds. But they may actually come quite quickly. In the not too distant future. We have seen some delays in Colombia related to the political situation. I would highlight Uruguay as one that doesn't get a huge amount of press, but the volumes are very high and a lot of interest there in tying offshore wind into hydrogen export. So that looks like a really well-organized leasing process in Uruguay and may come relatively quickly. Even things like Canada, where we've now seen Nova Scotia look at what's happening, pulling a lease process through there quite quickly. And we even have a very small lease process we're aware of in Bermuda, even if it's only for 60 megawatts. But we do see reasonably strong activity going on in these more emerging countries as well. That kind of links in a little bit with what we're doing in Asia and what we see in Asia. So let me wrap this up relatively quickly with a view in APAC and what's happening there. Q3 roundup for Asia, very simple. No lease areas were awarded outside China. So a very quiet period. That really contrasts with what we see coming up. So I think we're looking for the pace to pick up pretty quickly as we hit the end of the year and certainly into 2024. Countries to highlight here, if we look at Australia, Gippsland is the first area that we think will come quickly here. And we're expecting the feasibility licenses to be confirmed pretty quickly there. Lots and lots of interest. If I just blow Gippsland up, you can see the companies that are in here. It's a long list of different projects and companies that we can see, and I would expect that to increase over the next couple of months as well. So really very competitive process that we're seeing in Australia. Lots and lots of interests, and the volumes look very big as well. So very interesting market to watch there. Let's work down through here. India, somewhat difficult to track what's happening, but the volumes look positive, and actually the government looks like it's on track. The regulators are pushing this through according to their own timelines, slight delays, but nothing too dramatic. If we look at Tamil Nadu, which will be the first one to come, we've got 4 gigawatts coming there. So again, strong volumes that we can see coming through there, but no real clarity beyond a few rumors in the market about which companies will be participating in those processes. But that looks like that may well happen in 2024. So one certainly to watch as a new market. Japan is always worth a quick discussion. You can see we've got these 4 areas that we're tracking very carefully at the moment that have got those open lease rounds. There are a huge number of bidders competing in those. Some of the more traditional European companies are involved in partnerships, but we see a lot of domestic interest there from a wide variety of participants in Japan. I guess it's still one way to describe that is as a slightly more measured approach. The volumes are still not huge, but it looks like it's moving ahead after the delays after the last round and sort of revisiting the terms. Everything actually looks pretty positive from our perspective on the Japan side at the moment. So moving through those processes pretty well. One other thing we're starting to see is some of the other blocks, the other geographic areas actually moving through that funnel of opportunities. We've got sort of probably, I think there's over 20 different geographic regions that are at different stages now, but just recently we've moved Yuzu and Aomori South up. Now that we've got a better view on, even though they're still estimated dates, we've got a lot more confidence on those actually coming through on that schedule. So Japan looks pretty positive as well. We're hopeful we'll see some decisions for these 4 areas within the first quarter of next year. Let's just tie this up on a timely basis, I guess, for this very quick run around with Taiwan. Timely because we had an update earlier this week on 3.2. Can see we've only got 5 that we know will bid into that. The actual list will be a lot longer. The project list that we're tracking for that is also a lot longer for Taiwan. We'll start to move those projects into people who we know are submitting bids as we get confirmation from those developers that they are definitively part of that process. But we have got a lot more clarity on what's going on there. I think my colleague Casper commented on this on LinkedIn earlier in the week when we got that news a couple of days ago. So maybe check that one out. One thing I would say on the Taiwan process for 3.2, it does show that regulators, governments can listen to constructive feedback on their lease round processes. So even though there has been a lot of negativity around what's going on, particularly in the US, particularly in the UK, there was also a lot of criticism in Taiwan over the 3.1 process and how they were set up in the future. They have relatively considerably changed those terms and made it more attractive to developers for 3.2. So I do think even though there was some negativity, they have really sort of made a concerted effort to change the terms on offer. So that's some hope for positive outlook there, given that behavior with the Taiwanese regulators. Hopefully other governments, regulators, authorities take a similar approach. And I think they really have to in what is a fairly dynamic situation. And that sort of brings us to that conclusion now. I've already overrun a little bit, so let me tie this up as quickly as I can. Where does that leave us then with that negative outlook, that negative perception versus the reality that we've seen in Q3 and then more importantly Q4 into next year? What does this look like for lease rounds? Why do we even look at lease rounds without being too philosophical? For us, it's a key early indicator to determine if a country is on path to hit its long-term targets. If you don't have good lease rounds set up, you will not hit your country level targets. So that visibility, that clarity is key for the investment decisions that the industry has to make, whether that's for the developers directly or the supply chain more indirectly. So that's why we're tracking this so carefully and putting so much effort and time into getting this data set as accurate as possible. In Europe, I don't think it's all negative. There are signs of life. Watch out for what happens with the Celtic Sea. I'd particularly stress the new countries that are coming in as new entrants. That looks very positive. The next 6 months will not be so dynamic, but try and look beyond that. It does have difficult comparisons, particularly with Offshore Wind, which released such huge volumes into the market. That probably shouldn't be a comparison that we use going forward. That's not going to be the regular volumes that are released to the market. Similar story in the US and Americas. It does suffer in comparison to other rounds, but processes are definitely ongoing, opportunities spreading to other countries in North America. And Asia, bidding looks pretty strong. Volumes are definitely very significant in Asia. Focus is a mixture of those traditional countries such as Taiwan, but really watch out for those new countries as well. We're seeing a lot of progress very quickly from places like Australia and India. So for us, it's a story of these emerging countries, which really shows that it's a more increasingly competitive world out there. Lots of opportunities really spread more widely across different countries, which means it's less a case of projects selecting a developer and arguably more a case of developers now being able to choose and being able to select projects in a much more competitive environment, which will benefit those developers. So that was our conclusion. Let me bring the actual presentation to a close. We got maybe a couple of minutes before everyone deserts us. See if there's any Q&A questions that are coming in.
No, Oliver, thank you very much. Like I said, if there is Q&A, feel free to type them into the Q&A field. But if not, please reach out directly, and more than happy to have more in-depth discussions with our team. We can also have a full demo of the platform if that is of interest to you. But I want to thank you, Oliver. That was a lot of information, very efficient discussion in a short period of time. We did go over a little bit, but we try to make this a good use of everyone's time and not to just have a webinar just for the heck of it. We want to pass along great analysis and information to our attendees. So with that being said, I don't see any questions. I want to thank everyone for attending. We will have another webinar next month, and we will post that on our LinkedIn page. And if you are subscribed to our newsletter, you will have an email with the invitation to your inbox. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day, and we're always here to help. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.